Carl, thanks for coming in
Yeah.
today. We can keep this fairly informal, although it is a formal hearing. Could you give us a brief outline of what it is that the Consumer Council does in a few sentences?
Sure. Well, we are an arm's length organisation, wholly funded by the Government of Jersey. We aim to give a voice to consumers. We don't have any sort of statutory powers or ability to force change. We simply lobby and try and give and stand up for consumers and make sure that decision makers are hearing the voice of consumers, and that's sort of our sort of headline, one of our headline roles. But on a day-to-day basis, and literally I mean day-to-day, we are helping consumers who come to us directly with their own query, whether that might be trying to help disputing an insurance claim, to tracking a lost bag from an airline, or trying to address a shop that's refusing to accept a returned good. Whatever it might be, we are either getting involved, offering advice, or signposting individuals to other agencies that might be able to help, such as Trading Standards or else JCRA or whatever it might be, Financial Ombudsman.
Thank you. So in this particular case, we're looking at a fairly narrow subject, but it's one which seems to have attracted quite a lot of interest in terms of the submission. Certainly it's more than we might normally get for your average scrutiny review. We also accept it self-selecting, so people who've done the survey can choose to do so and make submissions. Again, we thank you for your submission. If I maybe ask a general question about the voice of the consumer in this particular area, do you have a feel for what that voice is and what the themes are that are coming out from consumers around the ability to use cash or cards to pay for things?
Yes, well, it's an interesting one, because I think from a consumer perspective, you would assume that we would be very much in favour of digital forms of payment for a number of reasons. I mean, it's consumer friendly. We can all recall the time, when we were younger, or when, you couldn't go shopping in town without calling a bank first, whether that's with your bank book or whether it's trying to whether it's using a cash till to withdraw your cash, to then go and spend it, and then you've run out of money, you've got to go back again. So it's far more convenient. It creates a digital record of everything. So in this day and age, when not everybody wants to issue a receipt, or you might have lost your receipt, you've still got proof of purchase. If you lose your bank card, you're covered to a degree from any losses. Whereas if cash falls out your pocket, the chances are it's gone. It also allows you to build up, importantly as well, I think it allows you to build up a credit, if you're using a credit card, a credit history, which will help you later in life when you might be applying for a mortgage or for a loan or whatever it might be. And I think from a consumer's perspective as too, is the benefits of using credit cards, especially in this day and age when they're competing for business, is the ability to earn other things beyond just having a piece of plastic. So earning air miles, earning points. There are a lot of benefits to paying digitally. However, cash still helps those people who just simply cannot budget. There are islanders, there are people who rely on being given cash, a certain amount of cash, or withdrawing a certain amount of cash, and doing their best to spend that. At least they then know, because there's a danger when you're spending plastic, you tap and you tap and you tap and you don't, and it quickly adds up, and before you know it, you've spent far more than you thought you had. Cash allows people to manage their budgets hugely. There are also members of the community who, for one reason or another, don't have a bank account or aren't allowed to have a bank card. Now, that might be because that can range from everything from somebody potentially who may have an addiction, or like a gambling addict who wants to completely step away from the ability to keep gambling, right through to potentially the victim of domestic abuse, who somebody is controlling and they're not allowing them to go and spend, and they still need some portion of freedom or whatever it might be. So those people and also people who have been declared bankrupt potentially will struggle to get a bank account in the future. They will rely on cash. I think there's still quite a proportion of the community who are paid in cash, particularly part-time workers, youngsters, bar workers, whatever it might be, hospitality. They might get paid in cash weekly. They still want to be able to spend that cash if they can. And as we mentioned in our submission, then there's this section of community who just for one reason or another don't have access to modern digital forms of payment and life and society in a way. And I think, digressing slightly, the acceleration towards online shopping that happened during COVID has isolated a proportion of our community who either don't have access to the internet or can't afford to have access. People think the internet's cheap, or relatively cheap, but you still need to buy a phone or a computer or have work done in your house or whatever it is to get Wi-Fi or buy a mobile phone. And I think those people are being completely left behind. And COVID has forced that, because prior to COVID, I think we had a small proportion of the community who would do all of their shopping online or regularly, including food. We had a bulk of the islanders who would dip their toe in, potentially for birthday presents, Christmas, the odd item that they couldn't find locally, and we had a proportion who never went near online shopping. COVID then accelerated that group of people that regularly shopped online to suddenly the majority of people now will regularly shop online or look online first or do the research first and buy it out of convenience. And these people have been completely left behind. And you cannot call even potentially a government department or a retailer or a call centre or whatever it might be without being met by a voicemail telling you, we're experiencing a high volume of calls, go online, it's a lot easier. And they don't have the internet, and everybody's pushing everybody online, which ultimately will be the way everybody goes. We're just ahead of our time. And we often get consumers coming to us who are struggling with certain aspects of life, but because they just can't fix it, when a younger person or somebody who has access to the internet could do it quite easily. So I think, to go back to your original question, from a Consumer Council perspective, I think we're probably on the fence. We're shouting for both sides. There's arguments for cards, and certainly from a business perspective, there's costs for them on accepting cards, but there's costs for them to go into the bank and paying in their money, to islanders wanting cash as well. And we think consumer behaviour will ultimately decide the route it goes.
Yeah. I mean, so there were two schools of thought, really. I mean, there's a common thought which is understandable, which is cash is going to be phased out organically, even if government decides it doesn't have a policy on that. And that's a question of time. It may be a number of years. It could be sooner or later. Another school of thought is that cash is quite resilient and it's going to be around for quite a long time, and that cash is still issued by governments ultimately, and they've got an interest in keeping it around. I suppose, I'm not sure which of those is true, if either. I suppose it's got to be one. And I also understand that the Consumer Council's point that really you've got to be aware of both sides, because card is convenient, and I think if we talk about losing cash, but in fact if we were to lose contactless, I know that would inconvenience so many people. Of course, I don't think that's going to happen. When it comes down to this, I suppose there's a line in your submission which is worth going to. The majority view of the council is that the government should avoid trying to force consumer behaviour on this matter, and should instead allow market forces and unrestricted consumer habits to dictate the future of transactions. Do I understand from that you'd be reluctant to suggest that government should mandate businesses to accept cash, for example?
Yes, I think it would be very difficult to do that. I mean, obviously it's possible, but you've got to think about the number of retailers that there are. I think we need to remember that consumers, either deliberately or directly or indirectly, can influence how our retail sector looks, feels, smells. You go back. Well, I think about how many supermarkets, small supermarkets there are now in the town centre compared to how many there were 20 years ago. The days of the big Saturday shop have gone. Consumers want to do smaller top-up shops. Now, that's either because they can't afford a huge one-off shop once a week, or just out of convenience. It's just the way life has changed. And town has evolved and changed organically because of that. And in the same way, we feel, or the majority view of the council is, that trying to force one route or the other wouldn't work, and it'd be better to allow consumer behaviour to dictate that. So if a consumer walked into a shop and wanted to buy a cup of coffee, and that place did not accept cash, and my phone was dead, and I had cash, and I didn't have cash in my and it didn't accept cash, and I only had cash in my pocket, I would walk out and I'd go and buy coffee somewhere else. And I'm sure that...
So we get that argument, and we've heard that before. We put it to one witness yesterday who said that's fine up until the point that all coffee shops don't take cash. And of course, if there's no government intervention, we get to the point where actually it's not just coffee shops. There's lots of places where you just can't pay cash. And then if nothing's been done about the exclusion of certain sections in the community, they just find that there are certain shops where they can't go, and therefore there's almost an apartheid system.
Okay.
If you're poor, if you're marginalised, or if neither of those, but you just don't have a bank account and cash is your main, is your only option, we've then got a divided community where you've got haves and have-nots. So I would say from a government point of view, it is a legitimate position for a government to take if it wished to say we're going to cater for the rights of the minority. And of course, there's also the rights of the business community. Mm-hmm. From a consumer council point of view, was that something that you've taken into account and consider, if I were to ask you, how do we cater for the rights of the minority in that situation where more and more places are not taking cash?
Yeah, I mean, I'm here to represent the view of the council, and that was the majority view. But I get the point. It's a strong argument, that.
Were there voices in the council who had contrary views? So when you say majority
yes,
view,
there were. So, but I've got to try and.
I'm not trying to catch you out.
No, I've got to try and take the majority of it. Yeah, I get that. But it's a good point. But I don't know what's easier, for the government to try and legislate that a retailer has to take cash, or whether the government comes up with some sort of facility that allows people who are cash only to deposit that cash in return for a COVID-style MasterCard that everybody got. But then you become a bank, and then it becomes a bit of a, red tape nightmare. I don't know.
No, thank you. That's useful. And the next question is: have there been any difficult situations where you've had to advocate, you or the council, on behalf of consumers on this issue? So an example might be somebody's contacting you and say, look, I can't go and use my cash in this place, or I went to buy something, it might be I filled up with petrol, I bought a coffee, drank the coffee, and then when I went there, they said no cash. Do you ever get complaints like that?
We haven't had that, but we've actually had it from a retailer recently, actually just before you launched before you announced the review. And it was a cafe who came to us and said, look, we're in a bit of a pickle because the bank is charging us the amount that we take on card every transaction adds up to the same as we're paying the same in bank fees as we would do for a part-time employee, right? Like a Saturday girl or whatever in the cafe. And I want to try, and it's killing us. It's eating into the profit. And I want to put a sign up or something to encourage people to pay in cash, but I don't want to put people off. How do we do it? How do we go about it? And so our advice to them was just be transparent. Just say that in a notice on the till. And I'm sure if you try and force it, people will feel forced and maybe reluctant to do it. Yeah. If you explain the reasons why and give the transparency, the banks, for every £1 you pay, the bank are taking 2.5p or 5p. Please, if you can, pay in cash. Which is why I think some retailers have a limit on the amount you've got to spend over before you can tap because it just becomes too costly for them. So we've had it from that perspective rather than consumers saying...
We noticed the signs going up. I mean, I don't know if it's the same place, but I noticed in the market, which is where we often go for lunch, or
Right.
that the signs started appearing saying we accept cash and card, but we prefer cash. And in your experience, does it depend on the business model? So is it a question of the scale of transactions being passed? And
It seems to be, yeah, because the big supermarkets will allow you to tap for a packet of chewing gum, whereas a little tea shop can't afford for you to tap for a slice of cake and a cup of coffee. They want you to pay cash if they can.
Yeah.
Because obviously those fees are proportionate, or maybe the bigger supermarkets can negotiate a better deal with the credit card providers.
And do you know what fees are for both cash? Because cash costs to bank as well.
It does. I don't know the precise fees, no, but I know that the range in terms of accepting tapping or cards, it can range anywhere between a debit card and a credit card. So debit card can be the cheapest at maybe 1% or 2%, right up to an American Express, which is the most expensive, which is why you see a lot of places actually decline. They don't accept American Express because its fees are so high. But proportionately, I think Jersey has a much higher take-up of American Express because it's linked to British Airways and people like to collect the miles.
Yeah, thank you. And just the last question from this part from me. Yeah. Do you collect any data on the use of cash that's circulating?
No, we don't. No.
I wouldn't necessarily expect you to. That's probably a question for Treasury. Yeah. Thank you. Max, are you okay to carry on with 5?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for being in attendance today. I just wanted to know whether you believe there is need to intervene in some cases where you see, for instance, digital payments being the only select payment available to consumers, and whether those concerns have been raised with the Consumer Council.
We haven't had consumers come to us about saying, we can't pay this, we don't know how to do that because this place is taking this, that, and the other. I think society is, as I said earlier, you go on a call centre or whatever, you try and speak to somebody, everybody's pushing you online. I think there needs to be, but we might come on to it further, help for those people, a bit more of an explanation. It's more education and explanation potentially than to say there are these routes available, this is how you do it. If you've only got cash, this is how you can come and do it. Yeah. At the moment, I don't think that's clear to people. No. And I'm thinking about if I was trying to pay, rather than buy something in a shop, I'm talking about if I wanted to pay a bill, if I wanted to pay, you needed to top up your tax or whatever it might be, interact with government or other big organisations. Because we're seeing the demise of the post office, we're seeing bank closures, we're seeing ATMs being removed. It is very difficult to interact with human faces and pay bills in the way that people used to do a long time ago.
And have you ever encountered individuals who come to you who, for instance, cannot open a bank account, and maybe they have problems because they're trying to make a payment and the only process available is, say, a digital service and there is no cash being transacted?
Not specifically, no. If somebody did come to us like that, we'd potentially point them in the direction of community savings. And we've met with community savings in the past about this issue quite a while ago, about particularly during COVID when people went cashless potentially for a different reason, but have now discovered, it's actually a bit easier for me. I don't have to send a member of staff down to the bank every Friday or with a big sack full of cash or whatever it might be. But which is where we learnt about, all this collection of people that can't get a bank account for one reason or another or don't have one.
And also, we've been asking other stakeholders who've come before the panel about technical failures that may happen, as we saw with the IT outage a few weeks ago. So do you believe there is a fundamental importance for cash to remain if we are going towards a digitalised society?
That was really interesting, that outage. Because obviously nobody knew how long it was going to last. No. So I'm curious as to how many of those businesses who have gone completely card only or cashless suffered and have realised maybe we made a bit of a mistake because my competitor 3 doors down has actually did a really good business, made a lot of money that day. Yeah. I know that, for instance, there's certain protections, like we saw Jersey Telecom were fined recently because they didn't maintain a 999 service, which was deemed to be crucial. We know that in the UK there is regulation on energy supply. So if your energy is cut off, we know that we've been dealing with this with Island Energy outage, but in the UK they are fined, or they have to pay compensation for, so there are ways, if the gas supply is cut off or electricity supply is cut off, so there are ways to regulate industry, and it's potentially possible to regulate, to force them to take cash. But equally, if that outage had lasted a week, I'm quite certain businesses would have adapted overnight and said, well, we can't sit here for a week and just not let all this stock rot. We've got to start taking cash. We'll just go back to how it was 5 years ago. So again, I think in that scenario, consumer demand and market forces would force that to happen itself without intervention or legislation.
No. Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to also ask, have you had any businesses contact the Consumer Council regarding, say, digital payments or cash payments, and they're seeking advice in terms of what they should be doing, or maybe if they've raised any concerns as well?
Yeah, just as I mentioned earlier, that tea shop was one of them who wanted to highlight, who wanted to try and force people down a cash route because it was cheaper for them, but didn't want to upset people. So our message was, just be transparent, just be honest. That's what people, consumers understand, that it's life is more expensive in Jersey, but what they don't like is prices going up without them being, without an explanation as to why. If somebody explains, well, this is why our prices have gone up. In the same way that when you walk into a supermarket and there's been a storm, there's a sign up to say, I'm really sorry, there's no bread at the moment, and you think, well, fair enough, there's nothing I can do about it. Whereas if you walk in and there's no sign and there's no bread, you start to get cross, or you might complain, or you go elsewhere. So just transparency, be transparent with consumers, and they'll understand. And that was our advice to them.
In your experience as well, we heard yesterday that the Hospitality Association, their members, well, the two people we had before us, they mentioned the importance of government giving people an option of both digital and cash payments. But have you had anybody approach a Consumer Council about concerns with the availability of digital services or cash services to them that the government provide? And have you had to contact the government as well to try and rectify any issues that have arisen?
Good question. Off the top of my head, I don't think so. No. But if I find anything, I can send it on. But I don't think we've had that sort of inquiry from people.
No. And also, the panel is fully aware that the local spend card that was used during the COVID-19 pandemic. And did you have any feedback from consumers, maybe potentially some people who maybe are not used to using cards, who maybe then asked you questions about how the cards would work, etc. And what was the overall feedback like from everybody who gave you feedback?
Well, interestingly, we were contacted during COVID, during lockdown, by the then Treasury Minister and her team who asked us for ideas of how they could get people spending locally again, because, as I alluded to earlier, everybody had shifted online at the time. And they were toying with the idea of removing GST for a time or for a period to get people out and about spending. And we said that would absolutely not work. A 5% saving on a television or whatever it might be, when you can already get it for much cheaper online, and if you're lucky, get the VAT removed, isn't going to make people head back out into town again. People were still fearful. So we actually put it to the Minister that they should come up with a voucher scheme. But at the time, we said targeted towards hospitality, because we knew that industry was suffering. So give people a voucher that they could spend in a hotel for a meal or a staycation. That discussion then evolved, and we looked at something that had happened in, I think it was Malta, where they'd done something similar, and then came the idea of the card. So we were fully behind that, fully supportive of it. But we knew then there needed to be restrictions, because you didn't want people walking into the betting shop and spending whatever it was, £200 and something straight on the next horse race. So, and I think pubs, I can't remember if it was restricted on alcohol or not. But the feedback we got was from people was that it was a great idea. We didn't have any negatives from that. It did seem to work. That could be something that solves this issue for people. I don't recall ever being contacted by somebody elderly or who didn't have, you didn't need the internet for that. You didn't need internet banking. And I think if you look at buses now, I think they charge more if you pay in cash. So it forces you down the route of having card. And it'd be interesting to see what proportion of their local users use the card now. And I'm sure quite a lot of those people who haven't got access to the internet but use the buses would have a card. So they used to tap in. It's all the data and the fiddling around behind it that's putting them off doing it. So a simple way of being able to tap as a backup could be a solution. Yeah.
And obviously, with the Consumer Council, you hear from businesses and maybe consumers. But do you think cards could potentially be used domestically in the future, maybe say to be supporting agriculture? And do you think there would also be a demand with consumers wanting to maybe purchase locally, but maybe they don't have good enough reason to purchase locally, maybe due to the expense of local produce, for instance, in agriculture compared to what's on the shelves in domestic supermarkets that's brought over from the UK?
So what you're saying, like if there was a card issued but it could only be spent on local goods?
Yes.
Well, I'm sure that people aren't going to throw that away and not use it. They would use it because it's, but if it depends whose money it is. If it's the government's money and here's a treat, that's different. If it's their own money and you're forcing them to spend it on local produce, you are potentially marginalising because you're forcing them to buy something that in some instances might be twice the cost of something that actually they need and they can't afford to spend locally sometimes. In some areas it's good value, in other areas it's not. Yeah.
Do you think we can expect to see shops? I mean, we heard yesterday, I think, from Digital Jersey or the Link representative that some countries have reverse, I think they're called reverse cash machines, where you put cash in and you get issued a card, which you can use at a particular mall or supermarket. Do you think that's something that companies over here might look at? For example, the co-op might be a good starting point, or do you think there's enough? Have you ever heard of that?
I was looking at something in South Korea where they load up cards, so it's not linked to your bank account, and everybody has some form of, whether it's still a card or not, it could be a watch or a key fob or something, but when you get your change, they were trying to, I think they've removed all coinage now.
Right.
And when you get any change from something, it loads into a card, so you constantly have that rather than
that's
money.
Yeah.
That could work, and it could be that people could, make a regular payment into that, or they could have their pension paid into that, or their benefits paid into that, or whatever it might be. It could be that the government may wish to consider legislating against paying people's wages in cash anymore, and saying, right, well, if the person doesn't have a bank account, they load it into this card, rather than. But then, I suppose, then you're pushing them down the route of a cashless society. But those sort of card or fob things do work elsewhere for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose one thing we're interested in is the transition that I alluded to at the beginning. And do you think that you've got a role, and what might that role be in helping with that transition to a less cash society, if we call it that?
Yeah, the Consumer Council certainly could make sure, it can scrutinise retailers and the industry to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. It can help promote and reassure consumers that this is a good thing to do, this is the way to do it. It can offer advice. It can, we understand it's a trusted organisation and brand, and if we felt it was the right thing to do, then absolutely we could do that and advocate for it. But just going back to your earlier point now about loading something, I think it's, as long as the technology is simple, or if there is even no technology behind it, so there isn't the need to also have an app or to get into the back end and load, the internet, just some sort of simple way of loading up a card through the co-op or the post office or whatever it might be. I think that could be quite a good solution and a backup.
Yeah. Thank you. There's one question here, actually. Do you have any thoughts from the council point of view in terms of differentials that might be charged depending on the way you pay? So, for example, do you have any thoughts if it became the norm to say you can have this coffee, but it's an extra 50p if you pay either one way or the other?
Yeah, well, the bus is one, but at the moment, I think I'm not sure it's if you pay in cash, I think your bus fare is maybe £2.80, I can't remember. Whereas if you tap or you use one of their cards, it's £2. So you are being penalised for paying in cash there.
I think they got three.
Was it three?
Well, I think it's preloaded is the cheapest. Contactless card, like your bank card, is another. I think it's £2.35 and
right, okay.
£2.80 for
Cash.
So
that certainly exists.
If they take cash, because I was on the bus yesterday,
right,
and someone came with a tenner, and they said, "Sorry, I don't have any change."
Right.
But I think he got on for free, strangely enough. So
fair enough. Friendly bus service.
Yeah, it might be hit and miss.
Yeah. So there's an example. I think in terms of, there was legislation passed in the UK which covers credit card providers and card providers, which prevented retailers from charging a percentage for using the card, because that was the norm maybe 20 or 30 years ago. However, it excludes the travel industry. So if there are any travel agents left and you try and buy through a high street travel agent and pay with a credit card, they can put on an extra 2% or 3% or whatever it might be on top of the price.
But as a general point of view, without committing, but would you generally prefer not to see price differentials applied across the board?
100%. Yeah, it should be fair. Yeah. It's cash nonetheless. I understand that retailers take a hit, slight hit if you pay with your card or your tap, but ultimately the gain for them is they can attract more people because not everybody has cash in their pocket anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are you okay with this, Max? If we haven't done it already.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Many respondents to our launched panel review into cash payments highlight concerns about certain individuals who maybe don't hold a bank account. So what actions do you believe could be undertaken by the government to try and support those individuals?
Parking aside those who can't have access to a bank account for one reason or another, such as they may have an addiction, they may have been declared bankrupt, they may have recently been released from prison, whatever it might be, I think there needs to be a piece of work to help that section of community who are predominantly the elderly, who have been left behind by the race towards technology accelerated by COVID. How that looks and feels, I don't know. We were discussing this as a council as a piece of work for next year. In an ideal world, you would have somewhere on the high street that simply has an army of people in it, armed with whether it's laptops, iPads, or simply there to help, that people can come in and simply say, if you think about it now, if you for whatever reason didn't have access to the internet and you needed to get to a funeral in the UK, how would you book a flight? Where do you go and book a flight? Well, you've got to get on a phone. Therefore, you're charged extra because you're booking it in person. You've got to sit on the phone for hours. You're paying, so there's people who are being excluded from doing things because they don't have access to the internet. I know that's slightly different from the argument or the debate that you're looking at, but that's where I think some energy should be placed to help those people continue to buy things and join in with the rest of the community, and also go in with help. Take their phone in, take their. I can't, for some reason it's locked. I don't know what's happened. I see that all the time, and it's those people that need that sort of help, I think. Yeah.
Do you think there's an obvious place that could do that, or a department, or an arm's length that could?
Well, I thought maybe Digital Jersey could be one area, but it's a little bit out of town. But there are plenty of empty shops, which I'm sure the landlords would rather have somebody in than nobody in, and it could just be a pop-up service.
And maybe a partnership between, say, the library, the customer local services.
Precisely. There's enough of us who could pull together to offer that service. We were trying to look at doing it ourselves, but it's It's the funds. We just don't have the money to buy that sort of equipment. No. And you'd have people queuing out the door potentially. But if Islanders knew there was somewhere they could go to help them pay a bill, pay a doctor's, whatever it is, how to book an appointment, how to reserve a seat somewhere, even Liberation Day.
Do you think parishes could play a role in that?
I do, because even now to book a seat for Liberation Day, unless you are someone who was here during the occupation, you're pushed onto an Eventbrite site to do that potentially, and it's just easy for us, but not for everybody.
No.
Yeah. No. But I know that's slightly straying from the debate, but I think it links back to it.
Yeah.
It says you can't go one way or the other until we've addressed these people.
It definitely links.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll have seen there's an irony that is the richer you are, the cheaper things are.
Correct.
You've got more means. And and the converse is true. But it's not quite what we're here to talk about. But I think there is a relevance there about if you've only got one method of payment, like you said, you've got in a sense, you're a captive audience, but also you've got limited options.
Yeah.
But that's not really a question.
No, it's an observation. Yeah, I agree.
This isn't necessarily directly relevant, but a lot of the submissions that we've had, and this is, I guess, where we get into the emotional attachment to cash and the people's just philosophies behind how they pay for things, is that there's a concern about security. Do you have any thoughts about security, also about people's data and what companies, what governments, what banks know about us when we're consuming?
We've got big concerns about this at the moment because we've recently seen a move towards retailers not wishing to issue receipts and instead almost pressure you into giving an email address. Yeah. And that email address is like cash to a retailer because that is king. They can sell that data. And we've recently issued guidance on that through social media, and we will be doing through printed media soon. We're trying to educate consumers not to feel pressured into giving that email address because they shouldn't have to.
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
And it's also an issue, I think, for the staff because the staff are being told to ask for...
And they're embarrassed.
Yeah.
They're as embarrassed. And you know it's coming when you get to the till in certain retailers, and it's embarrassing for them, it's embarrassing for you. Some say, we're trying to save the environment, so please give it. Some say, the best option is, would you like a receipt or not? Which is fine. You can opt, if you've bought a pint of milk, are you really ever going to take it back? How many, that's fine. But and again, you're marginalising those who don't have email addresses. You're making those people feel awkward. Yeah. You're leaving those people out. You're leaving them, what am I missing out? Why aren't I getting these offers? Why they're getting offers because they've registered their email address. I'm not. I can't opt out. I'm being bombarded with emails. I don't know how to unsubscribe, etc., etc.
Is that something you would raise with the channel, with the information officer, the data protection?
Yeah, we're going to speak to them about it for sure.
Yeah. We can. Yeah, I don't know if it's directly relevant for us to do that with this review, but I think it is.
I think we've spoken to them previously, and they were in support of us reminding consumers that they don't have to, they shouldn't have to give.
It does feel underhand if they can have your email address. It's not directly relevant, and unfortunately, you need to be savvy to know.
Yes.
Why they're asking.
Yes, and at that point of giving it over the till, you're then subscribed. Yeah. And it's not until you start receiving the emails that you can then go into it and start unsubscribing. And if you don't know how to unsubscribe or you're just deleting these emails, that's it. Your data's out there. And you're getting emails from left, right and centre. Yeah,
good. No, thanks for that. And in terms of the security, are there security issues? I mean, you've been involved with the scams, I think, in highlighting what scams are going on. Is there Are there methods of payment which you think are more secure than others, and what advice?
Yes, we. That's why the Consumer Council last year was quite heavily involved in this credit card problem that Jersey is facing, in terms of them withdrawing from Jersey or not accepting new customers, because whilst it might seem odd for the Consumer Council to encourage people to have credit or credit cards, managed properly, they're the safest way of spending your money. Because you're protected under the Consumer Credit Act, the goods that you buy through there are covered with an extra warranty. It's safer than shopping online. I give talks to various agencies or the WI or whoever it might be regularly. The number of people who still shop online with their debit card is worrying, because that, if hacked, if lost, if put in the wrong, in a fraudulent website that looks like the same, that gives people direct access to your current account. Whereas a credit card, you're protected, you're ring fenced, they can't get in. Even if they spend, that money's recoverable. If you end up spending it on a false ticket site for tickets to a concert and it turns out to be you've been ripped off, that credit card company will refund that money back to your account and they'll take it up with that. They'll try and recover the costs themselves. So the safest way to shop is with a credit card, but that has to be done carefully because it's very easy to fall into debt and start paying interest on that. So, but managed properly, they are a great resource. Plus you can earn points, cashback, miles, lots of benefits by using a credit card.
Thank you. No, it's useful. I think we've pretty much covered most of the questions that we've got for you. I mean, there is one question here actually. Does the council have any evidence or that the use of cash contributes to higher prices? And if so, in what circumstances? Well, it could be the use of either form of payment, really. So is it cheaper to pay or more expensive to buy things? I mean, you've already talked about shopping online, which gives access to discounts often.
Locally, I can actually only think of one example, which is of a petrol station, because we publish all of the petrol prices, who actually discounts for cash.
Really?
Yes. What their reasons are, I don't know. And we know that, you know, often people who are employing tradesmen at home might offer to pay in cash to see if that gets a bit of a discount. I don't know. So the only evidence I've got really is of the reverse, as in it's a bit cheaper sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, they used to say cash is king. Whether it still is or not, I don't know. But it's more that you might get a discount if you operate in cash, because it can go straight in their pocket rather than through a credit card company that then goes through a bank account and then comes back to you via the taxman.
This is perhaps a slightly tongue-in-cheek question, but the Consumer Council doesn't extend to the shadow economy, does it?
It does not. No.
Do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, this isn't directly for you, but there's clearly there's legitimate trade, there's legitimate commerce, and then there's the shadow economy, which can be all sorts of things, from people doing legitimate work but not necessarily declaring tax, to the completely illegal economy of, you know, drugs and money laundering, etc. Do you have any thoughts about that aspect of moving towards a cashless society and therefore having less fiscal leakage, having and the effects that might have on the economy wider and on consumers, on quality?
The council doesn't. I was sitting here personally. You would assume moving to a cashless society would all but erase that economy. It would force everybody to declare everything, potentially. It could, in some ways, that could be a benefit. As you say, you know, and money laundering and drug dealing and all sorts of stuff and crime still uses cash. Yeah. That could have some, you know, significant benefits on that side for sure.
Yeah, thank you. No, except that's probably a personal response rather.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, look, I think for my part, we've covered everything that I need to ask. Have you got anything, Matt?
No.
Fine.
Have you got anything you want to ask us, or any additional information?
No, not. I would only just. But I think I said it. But I would only add that not to underestimate the influence that consumer behaviour can ultimately have. You look at the makeup of the high street, you look at our habits, that's all evolved naturally, and it will evolve eventually. But I do see exactly why you're doing it, because you made an excellent point before. I hadn't necessarily considered about, you know, if all shops suddenly declared that they weren't accepting cash, and that's that, you know, there is a problem for some that does need addressing, 100%.
Yeah. No, thank you. Well, we've got a lot to think about. You've given us a lot to think about.